Hey everybody, this is Ben Miller again from Third Motion Studios, here to present you with episode 2 of Ouroboreality. Thanks for joining. This episode, before I begin, I want to just make a disclaimer saying I don't own any of the graphics, I stole them. So just ask me if you want to know anything about where these come from or whatever, I'll try to find you the sources. Anyways, this is about spirals and implosion, which is how information travels around the multiverse that we live in. So that shape right there is icosahedron and dodecahedron nesting in each other. They're the only platonic shapes that can actually recursively nest in each other as if their points are touching a sphere. Um, Infinitely inwards and outwards, and this is kind of like the idea of implosion that we'll be talking about. And here's a few examples of nature and how it uses the golden ratio spiral, which actually it uses the Fibonacci spiral, which is an approximation of it in galaxies, Nautilus shells, the arrangement of uh, sunflowers and DNA, as well as weather systems, plants, the way that they receive light in an optimal configuration, the way that branches branch off of each other, and the way that arts make use of the golden ratio for proportion. It's a very important ratio. Uh, it's ironically irrational, so it's like not like other ratios, and we'll be exploring that. So we first want to note that in sacred geometry, the feminine it refers to curvature, like circles, ovals, and curves and spirals and things of that nature. Masculine forms are based on straight lines, so it's like squares, triangles, uh, other shapes like uh, that use straight lines. Um, Rectangles, etc. Fibonacci sequence is a sequence that generates the ratio called the golden ratio more and more as it goes on. This is the sequence, and it starts by kind of following this sequence using that feminine curve to follow the masculine kind of generative pattern there, which starts with a 1, add 1, and then you now add the previous to the 2 that you get the previous, which is the 2, you add that to the 3, you add the 3 to the 5, you add the 5 to the 8, you add the 8 to the 13, you get 21, you add the 13, you get 34. It's basically you just keep adding, the last two terms in the sequence, and as it progresses, it further approximates the ideal golden ratio. As such, this is the number that goes on infinitely that you are trying to approximate as you keep iterating this pattern. As you iterate the pattern, you keep getting closer, but you never actually reach this infinitely specific pattern. Um, it's only an approximation of the golden ratio at all times because this requires infinite resolution, as I spoke of in the first video. If you want to check that out, that's the first pilot episode on time and entropy in the era of time. All right. Next, we get a visual representation of the ratio, how it has sort of A plus B is as A is to B, so you continue to get this sort of self-referential ratio that kind of applies on all scales. That's the ideal. As you see here, it's like it's got these kind of like powers. Uh, it's related. It's basically the conjunction of all kinds of different mathematical relationships happening together in the same way. Like you can get power functions involved, and you can get the inverse is equal to, so like the inverse of the golden ratio is equal to 1 minus the minus the inverse, which is, forget about it. Uh, basically the real golden ratio spiral, as opposed to the Fibonacci spiral, goes outwards and inwards infinitely at the same rate. So it's like a fractal that continues to zoom in on itself and zoom out, and it's always going at the same rate. And so you can kind of just, it's like what they call cyclic conformal cosmology, or scale invariance, where no matter how deep into it or far out, far zoomed out you are, it always looks the same, and it's kind of like the same territory, no matter what scale you're at. And it's infinitely precise, therefore it is only theoretical. So the world we live in is quantized and it's reduced and it's finite, so there's no way that we can actually ever get a true um, representation of it. It's only just approximations. So they exist in magnetic fields, kind of the way that it compresses into the poles. That's kind of approximations of a golden ratio spiral in order to compress. It's in biology, in cells, in trees, in human beings, in apples. It's like a perfect torus, which is a shape of like a donut that is an electromagnetic field like that, where golden ratio spirals are approximated, as well as in these weather systems, the entire planet Earth, uh, which is where you get astrological influences from other planets because they have the same thing. And the galaxy center is also another spiral. So it's kind of everywhere. Even if you don't see it, it's there. Bet you weren't ready for me to name this slide golden ratio spirals. Um, so we wonder, why are golden ratio spirals conducive to implosion? What does this have to do with data compression and therefore transfer of information between higher and lower dimensions? It's because they bear at a constant angle, which means that if you're just isolating a single constant at that point, doesn't vary, so you can drop it when you take the derivative in calculus. If you know anything about calculus, then great. If you don't, it's basically like, since it's present at the same rate at all times in every situation, it's kind of like you can ignore it, and it becomes like a carrier wave. That angle becomes kind of like a carrier wave for everything else. Like, so you don't really need to consider it at a certain point. And then this makes it the closest thing to a line in one dimensions, but in two dimensions. So it's like it's entering the second dimension as it spirals, but it doesn't really have more than one angular coefficient. As you see here, it holds together dimensions with a singular angular coefficient. And now you see sort of the polar, like a graph based on angles, where the bearing is sort of just constant as it crosses all these lines coming out. And so it kind of compresses this 360-degree rotation into one line, basically. And then you find it within these torus fields for that reason. Therefore, what we call normalizing is where you basically chop out kind of like irrelevant information from what you're trying to explore, because that angular component is no longer interesting to look at, because it's just constant, and all the pertinent information can be gleaned from whatever else is there. It's like transferring the number 1,245,567 into 1.23457. If I wanted to do, like, I pretty much doing away with over a million numbers technically, but I can still like regenerate that number from this number. So I'm not really losing anything valuable by getting rid of information, and that's what we're doing here. Voila. All right, so here we're going to talk about loxodromes. Loxodromes are like a constant angle with respect to um, the latitude lines on a sphere. It's kind of like the same idea, but on a sphere, and with two poles rather than one singularity in the center. They're also called rum lines in navigation. They look like that. On a 3D sphere, they're constant angle, so you're always kind of with the same angle with respect to your latitude when you're considering the globe like as a flat plane locally. This creates angular coefficient, which can drop the same way that you the dropped it in the previous slide. Um, Therefore, spherical information can be also compressed via a spiral. Already said that. Angle can vary as long as distance is an integer of multiple of periods, so that it lines up with the poles, so that you have a spiral that ends up hitting both poles. You have to have it be an integer multiple of the period. Now we have stereographic projection of a Riemann sphere. A Riemann sphere is pretty complicated compared to what it looks like. It's just looks like a sphere, but this component, one of them is at infinity. It's plotted on a complex plane, and it's quite, it's a whole thing that you want to look up if you want to learn more. But the basic idea here is this really hyper nerdy spiral compression example where this abstract spherical mathematical object representing complex plane geometry, which is used in quantum field equations, can be simplified into a single line, uh, and this single line automatically generates two vortices, and the entire Riemann sphere can be extrapolated from just the single line that creates these two opposing vortices, kind of like an electromagnetic sphere or electromagnetic uh, field. So you see a similarity. If you didn't get any of that, it's basically showing that more spirals compress information. Wow. All right. Now, I wanted to originally reached out to Dan Winter to try to have him as a guest the on this new series, but he originally agreed to be on it, but then because of some kind of disagreement he had with me about time, and then me saying time is really uh, an illusion, and he don't think he agreed with me on that, and so he sort of backed out, which is unfortunate because I'll be presenting the reasons why I believe that. He didn't have a good response to that, and it's too bad because he's somebody who I really draw a lot of inspiration from in this field. He pioneered this geometry that you see here, and you can go check him out. He's got a huge YouTube channel and websites and stuff. Um, so this is a geometry um, where of implosion following those nodes in the original icosahedron, dodecahedron uh, pattern that I posted on the first slide, where they're nesting inside of each other. Their nodes are like these nodes here, and the spirals are following those nodes, and it kind of creates these what he calls pine cones kissing noses, which are like the shape of pine cones follow the Fibonacci series. And so now you have them kind of like the north and south poles as different pine cones that are hitting a center singularity. Um, it's kind of like you're taking higher dimensional information, and it's like a bathtub of information in higher dimensions draining into a lower dimension through these spirals. That's why you see spirals in bathtubs, as you see the dimension of the information in the bathtub going closer to a point from a three-dimensional bathtub, kind of. So that's a good visual of how galaxies and stars and every piece of matter, to some extent, resembles that. And here again, you have that icosahedron dodecahedron configuration. So Dan Winter, just got to give him some credit, even though he's not joining us on this. Golden ratios follow nodes of regularly recurring icosadodeca nesting lattice. Uh, they're both Platonic solids, which were Plato talked about, and Neoplatonists, meaning people who followed Neoplaton, Neoplatonic ideas, and Neoplatonic Gnosticism being a spiritual variant of that, and spiritual alchemy make use of these Platonic solids to refer to the elements. And this has a really deep esoteric connotation here. Not many people know that the elements are geometrically coherent based on these Platonic forms, and the elements refer to many different facets of nature. And here you have, the prime substance of the universe, um, broken down into the masculine and feminine, and how those break down into the elements. And then further down, you get the trinity of the alchemical trinity of salt, mercury, and sulfur. So, what does golden mean compression involve? It involves charge collapse. So, the compression that we're talking about is charge. Charge and light are the same, but in different facets of the same thing. You have electromagnetic, the word electromagnetism, and light. They're all different angles of the same phenomenon. So you have charge collapsing inwards through these spirals that is coupled with an electric field that causes kind of gravity, it causes bliss, it causes a lot of things. Phase conjugate, meaning that the phases, meaning the angular ratios between the different components of the charge collapse, are synchronized with each other. Negentropic means that it kind of promotes the opposite of entropy, or the heat death of the universe. It kind of like it vivifies things, it adds life, it gives order. Perfectly heterodyning means this, that when you add them together, the number of, if you add together a bunch of frequencies, it kind of like consolidates them into one signal without interfering. When they compress, the waves add and multiply constructively. So you kind of just get in a symbiosis. You're getting all kinds of waves coming together and creating oneness, and where the waves add and multiply at the same time constructively. Once again, these graphics are not mine. I'm about to show you this graphic, which I got from internet, says Encyclopedia Britannica. It shows longitudinal waves, which are like compression fronts that correspond to these wavy, oscillating up and down kind of waves. And this is a day in winter. This is a day in winter graphic here, showing how, as you go down the spiral, you reach sort of this endpoint where the data no longer can continue to go in this pattern, because our consciousness doesn't reach that level anymore. It kind of reaches the limit of a threshold of our perception, and gets kind of converted into these longitudinal waves, as you see over here. So the charge hits the threshold of the seed of the Fibonacci sequence, which is the one unit at the smallest scale, which is the Planck unit. And once it reaches this threshold, it's converted from transverse to longitudinal, from this kind of wave to that kind of wave. They add and multiply recursively, and it creates an array of nodes. This array of nodes is a power series of the Planck energy times integer powers of the golden ratio, which is to say that it lines up with each number. Each node is like the next exponent higher. So like golden ratio to the nth power, then golden ratio to the n plus 1 power. As you see here, the hydrogen is Planck times golden ratio to the 116th power, and the next orbital level is 117th power, and the next one is 118th power. So you see these levels, concentric levels of nodes, are related to powers of the golden ratio. That these entry points, these nodes are entry points of the strand of energy that was imploding, leaving our dimension, going through higher dimensions, uh, through their own kind of like spiral continuation, and then reappearing into our slice of reality at intervals. And we also know this as quantum entanglement, which is why things are, seem to be connected over long distances, with no time delay. And this can cause, um, you know, superluminal or luminal information transfer, which means at the speed of light or more. Um, so basically, we have a spiral of collapsing charge exiting our dimension via wormholes from the singularity inside of the Planck sphere at the center of the field that you're imploding into. The luminal and superluminal information transfer ensues and causes things to happen, to change in the past, because anything faster than speed of light is changing things in the past. Longitudinal nodes are the entry points. I already said that. Okay, so process and that enables quantum tunneling as well. So when particles like electrons jump from one orbital or one standing wave to another in a quantum leap without passing through the space in between, it's really leaving into a higher dimension and reappearing without any time elapsing. We know this all as wormholes in Einstein's kind of vernacular. Here's some an animation of some of the geometry that Dan Winter provided on his website. It's pretty cool. And then Frosty here is telling us that intelligent design is real. Your DNA is in the perfect geometry of converting higher dimensional information into its closest approximation within our finite realm. All right, thank you, Frosty. That was very insightful. Here is, the basic layout of compression of waves upon waves. Here you have kind of a basic wave, and then you build a wave on top of the other wave, and it kind of nests information fractally. You can keep zooming in and getting more resolution on a DNA strands. Kind of like, it's kind of like you build a string. You create a braid. You make a rope out of that braid, and then you get a new rope, and then you braid that rope into a new rope, and you kind of continue until you get as much compression as you can. We see articles on sacred geometry. This website is in Spanish, but they have a English translation. It's a great website with a lot of resources. Here's an example of an article about phi and DNA structure. Here's how kind of the golden ratio, by the way, which is also referred to as phi, kind of is present in the structure of the actual DNA itself, and then the actual codons, if I'm not mistaken, with the and musical ratios are present too in the codon populations. So when they used to tell us that junk DNA was basically most of DNA was just this kind of meaningless filler, it turns out that they were wrong. It definitely does a lot of things, and it's not very well understood. But one of the reasons that's important is because of this phi is this perfectly irrational balance that is impossible to achieve if you mess with it. So if there's phi in the codon populations and you decide to snip out pieces and move them around, we don't know what GMO is really doing to us, because we don't know what upsetting this perfect balance does. Say it's kind of like playing with fire a little bit. Here we see this perfect balance in all kinds of aspects of the human form, the ideal human form, and then molecular structures. We have phi, in the periodic tables, nodes of, important inflection points in the periodic table, and we have a bunch of geometry here, taken from an article by someone named Dr. Moon, who studied the periodic table and where sort of the geometries shift from different, to just kind of like evolve throughout the periodic table. Now we have another example here of Fibonacci channeling higher dimensional information into our conscious field through microtubules, which are based on these, golden ratio approximations happening along these tubulin quantum bits that are within the fine structure of our neurons and the axons and the dendrites and things of that nature. That's published by famous mathematician, physicist Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, who is a leading consciousness researcher originating from the field of anesthesiology in Arizona. So these guys got teamed together and created a consciousness theory. It's great, called which is orchestrated objective reduction. And here we have another example of Fibonacci channeling higher dimensional information into our conscious field, kind of like the bathtub, the higher dimensional bathtub funneling into our brain through a drain. The drain is called the pineal gland. It's important throughout all religious, esoteric traditions. It's here, right in front of the Vatican. There's a big pine cone, because the pine cone follows this, golden ratio Fibonacci spiral. Our brain has it right in the center somewhere. I don't know why it's not labeled here. The Egyptians, knew about it. The Babylonians here knew about it. They have the pine cone being used as a weapon to control people with this bag here, found all over the world in ancient art, depicting sort of secret information, that secret knowledge and their ability to use it to control their reality. So there you go. Thank you very much for joining me for this second episode. I will be I'm not sure what the next one's going to be about, but stay tuned and we'll be continuing this journey. So have a great one. Thanks for joining. Talk to you later. Peace.